So that's what I was doing, was I was having a good hard think. However, what's clear from what happened then is the plants understood me. Even though it was an internal thought, they telepathically received the message. Secondly, they understood it and had capacity to change themselves. And thirdly, they changed themselves at my request for our convenience to support the people living in that landscape. And those three things put together, frankly, first few times it happened to me, it was so mind-blowing I really pretty much went to bed for 3 days until the world reorganized itself.
You might remember a previous guest on this podcast by the name of Terry McCosker. Terry co-founded an organisation called RCS Australia some 35 years ago. Fellow Australian legend and also a guest and dear friend of this podcast is best-selling author of Call of the Reed Warbler, Charles Massey. In that book he wrote, "When I look back over the rise of regenerative agriculture in Australia, I see at the forefront Terry and Pam McCosker and their RCS organisation. Today, it remains a world leader in the field." In light of that, I titled the episode with Terry, "Behind the Greatest Regenerative Agriculture Movement in Australia." Well, as I got to know Terry better over the years, I started to hear more and more about a bloke named Patrick MacManaway, who Terry had been working with since 2010. And Charles later shared with me his missing chapter from Reed Warbler, the one deemed a little too edgy to include at the time. Patrick features significantly in that chapter, along with some now famous stories of his father. So as the years went by, I became increasingly interested in learning about the man alongside the man behind the movement. All the more knowing that Patrick's extraordinary influence is far from limited to Australia. Born in Scotland to pioneering parents, when Patrick realised he shared his father's gifts, he also shared his medical training before his calling deepened and spread around the UK, onto North America and beyond. G'day, Anthony James here for The Regeneration, your independent listener-supported portal into the regenerative era, with thanks to generous listeners like Mark Cowold, Dave Godden and Stephen at Urban Green Space. Thanks, men, for being paid subscribers for over 3 years now, making all this possible. If you're not yet part of this great community supporting listeners, I'd love you to join us, get benefits if you like, and help keep the show on the road. Just follow the links in the show notes, as always, with my enormous gratitude. I caught up with Patrick at his home near Burlington, Vermont in the fall last year. Yep, this unique episode called for some time, sifting through the hours of material we gathered in one long sunny day together. We start in Patrick's garden, journey to a couple of locations where Patrick has worked, a farm-to-table restaurant that replaced McDonald's. Then we're full circle back to the garden for a few more of Patrick's most memorable stories and news of his next endeavour, recently launched with Terry McCosker, before he takes us out with a little tune. G'day, Patrick.
AJ, pleasure to meet you.
A pleasure to meet you. Thanks for having us at your house.
Thank you so much for making the journey here to northern Vermont.
And here we are out back of your place. So I gather this is your block, but there's no sort of fences between neighbours and stuff around here, hey?
The Americans have quite an open plan approach to their yards and gardens, I've found.
I've noticed.
In Europe, we make sure we've got fences around.
Often Australia too, though some are bringing them down deliberately, you know, to just, well, not feel like you're imprisoning yourself as much as anything, as much as wildlife or anything else.
There's always the matter of rabbits and groundhogs and vegetables. But no, we define the edge with trees and flowers, and where you stop mowing is It's about the edge of it.
That's cool. So we're looking at a little gathering circle around fire. I imagine you might use this a little.
We do, either for family cookouts or sometimes gatherings with a more particular focus. There's a men's group that meets here every couple of weeks and likes to light a fire, and then visiting dignitaries such as yourself being entertained.
Very good.
Yeah.
Is gardening, do you manage to get very hands-on given your schedule?
No, and as you can see, there's hours of weeding waiting to be done. So I'm hoping you guys are going to give me a hand pulling weeds later on this afternoon.
A 10-year-old doesn't mind getting put to work, thankfully.
No, but it's just a pleasure. But I travel too much to keep on top of it.
Has that been a dilemma for you? I'm curious in terms of how much you get to embody your accrued knowledge and wisdom over time versus taking, let's just say, a global approach and helping others. Has that been a tension for you? Have you sort of longed at times to be more grounded in your place, or this is well and truly your calling?
Yes and yes, both, AJ. I'm very much a homebody, and I hate to leave wherever I am.
Is that right?
But circumstances of my work and profession have required me to go a lot where people are, obviously working on places. I need, not entirely, I can and do a lot of work long distance using maps and photographs. Google Earth and so forth now has revolutionized that. Don't have to work off of paper maps anymore. So quite a lot of my clients, in fact, I can serve without a physical on-site visit, but historically and still by preference, being in location, meeting the clients, seeing and feeling what the concerns are is preferable. So
yeah,
it is a bit of a life on the road, but I grew up in Scotland and I visited Vermont here in 1984 first, so in a way I'm always coming home when I travel. Either way. And then Australia has just been such a pleasure since 2010 when Terry McCosker and RCS included my work in their programming.
How did that encounter come about?
So I was brought in as one of their international speakers for their 2010 20th anniversary conference.
There you go. So we were just talking about their 30th that due to COVID you missed, and so we didn't meet there.
Right.
But you were a pivotal moment then was their 20th for you.
Their 20th was my introduction both to Australia and RCS, and Marg Bridgeford at the time was CEO. And with help from Peter Downey, who was bringing resonant kinesiology into the RCS community, they tracked me down. At the time I was president of the British Society of Dowsers.
Because they'd been running courses along these lines, as I understand it, for about 8 years prior. I think they'd been running the quantum agriculture umbrella stuff for...
The quantum started with me.
Did it? Right, okay.
Under that branding, but I think they'd had presentations from different dowsers. Alana Moore is a very well-known and well-published practitioner of this stuff. She now lives in Europe, but she's Australian by birth, and she'd given presentations, and they had a couple of other people also do that, and then they got very much into the human health-based resonant kinesiology work. And knew there was a bridge, but wanted somebody to create a program of specifically the subtle energy inside of agricultural context was how I got my invite, and subsequently they kept on bringing me back.
That's very interesting, considering your path where the human health bridged out to the land. Let's come back to that. I'm almost sorry to leave this because I have felt a lovely vibe here, as with the sounds, and notwithstanding the trains and the cars and the other things, but there's this beautiful little hum of life where we stand. But we've got a couple of destinations to hit up that are relevant to the story too, so shall we do it?
Lovely.
So, I see your car of choice is an Equinox. Was that deliberate? Destiny.
Yeah, that was the last car. It got long in the tooth and expensive, so I gave it to David, and now it's waiting for more repair. This was Heather's dad's car. He went into a nursing home, and this was in the family. And
So yeah, picking up the story with your arrival in Vermont, what brought you to Vermont in the first place? Those nearly 40 years ago.
1984 was the first visit. So, very simple, AJ. The American Society of Dowsers is based here in Vermont. And dowsing was a central practice in my family's work, mostly using it for using it really for everything, from figuring out if the bread was ready to come out of the oven, or which was the best horse or car to buy, or routes or timing or planning. So dowsing was very central to the family's just life and process, but in a professional context they used it for diagnostic assessment and therapeutic protocols.
Because that had been in a centre for such things. What was it called again, your family practice?
Yes, my parents set up the West Bank Healing and Teaching Centre in 1959 on a little farm in rural Scotland. At the time it was very unusual because of the legacy of the witchcraft laws to be practicing mediumship, divination and spiritual healing outside of the ordained.
And it had been illegal then?
It had been illegal under the witchcraft laws, and then that changed. I think in 1952 we got the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which finally allowed us to be mediumistic and intuitive as long as we weren't fraudulent, which seemed like a very good and sensible piece of legislation.
That's very interesting. Our young fella, of course, asked you what's witchcraft at the table just before, when a bit of this came up, but I might run with the same question for people who only know, in a sense, the stereotypes or the legacy of that period.
Yes. Well, I think the big picture is, I think probably for 99.9% of our history all around the world, we've effectively been what we might call animist. And there's been very much an awareness of the intelligence, not only of our own ancestral community of spirit, but also of the spirits of place, the genius loci for the Greeks, the particular quality of intelligence of rock and mountain and stream and soil. And whether we're looking at sort of hunting-gathering communities or whether we're looking at agricultural communities, the communication with the governing intelligence of landscape has always been primary for survival. In Scotland back in the day, the Celtic kings, of whom Macbeth was one, those were really not so much positions of arbitrary executive authority. The kingship was elected typically by women and chosen from senior sages and druids, and their job was of an ambassadorial nature. So equinoxes, solstices, cross-quarter days, times of significant transition and change in the landscape, moving between spring and autumn, winter and so forth. Whoever was on the job, the King of Scotland, would have to go up to the central sacred mountain, Schiehallion, the hall of the Queen of the Sidhe. The Sidhe are the landscape intelligences. We would call them fairy, but they're not petite Tinkerbell. They're sort of 40 foot high, shining beings, and a bit intimidating when you encounter them. So, but literally Macbeth and his predecessor's job was to, in meditation, in communion, in vision, we assume with fasting, possibly with the use of fly-agaric mushroom, which is fly-agaric and psilocybin are both used for trance inducing in the Celtic countries. So, but his job was to communicate with this overarching landscape intelligence and literally come down the mountain, sort of Moses style, with a script of how many deer could be taken and how many fish could be taken and what the planting and harvesting dates would be, because back in the day we didn't have Google, we didn't have almanacs, we didn't have library, we really didn't have any written historical record, so your only source of information was anticipation and experience. And so they really did want to know what their grandparents and great-grandparents had done last time they had a flood like this, or a frost like this, or a plant illness like this. And so their only strategy was to communicate with tribal ancestors and the spirits of place to follow in accord and guidance, so that the wells would be full and the cattle would be fat, and, as they say here in America, all the women would be strong and the men good looking and the children above average. So,
you know, you made the Moses allusion before. It is striking that these archetypes of mythology recur across cultures. And when you think about, relying on your ancestry for knowledge, the ways that's been left behind in some cultures, I want to say my culture, our culture maybe, modern Western Enlightenment culture, that's been left behind, but that it was a universal experience and remains, in our ancestry, if not in our DNA.
it is, and because of being raised in a space where that was ordinary, my sort of go-to support team includes companion angels and mum and dad variously, and also a number of other friends and colleagues, as well as genetic linear ancestry, who are available to help out in all manner of what we would consider miraculous ways, because they're for us non-linear, non-logical, but to not be including your friends in high places on your power team is seriously missing a trick.
That, I think, is dawning on many more of us. It might be worth saying, given we're in the car, so we're passing a university. I'm told it's a university town. Are we passing said university?
This is it. This is the University of Vermont. Very gracious and elegant buildings here at the top of the hill.
Yeah. And awash with activity, because it may even be the first day of semester?
Very close to it. I think they went back on a couple of days ago.
Okay.
Yes, so we're full of eager and well-intentioned young learners.
Indeed.
Here.
You get a glimpse of the hope of youth, darting about the knowledge centre as we have it. And yeah, on a lovely sunny day, and yeah, a bit of traffic we're stuck in, but it gives us time to talk. So maybe it's a good juncture to follow that thread through some ancestry and go back a little further and how this did become a normal part of your life. Where did it start in your family?
In my family, I can't quite trace it back, AJ. What I know is my Irish grandmother was deeply into it. But at this point, both my parents as well as grandparents have passed, so I now would really like to sit down and have a good old chat and find where did that come from in her life. Was it an unbroken tradition running in a female lineage, or was she particularly gifted or curious as an result? But certainly she was part of what's now the White Eagle Lodge, which is a society of spiritual enlightenment and healing that still continues to this day, and formed in the early part of the 1900s around a medium called Grace Cook, and she apparently had connection with a Native American old soul who went by the name of White Eagle, hence the White Eagle Lodge. And there was a huge amount of spiritualism being practiced in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Illegal technically in Britain under witchcraft laws, but very open here in the US, with a lot of summer camps for spiritualists, and that was the thing you went and did, for your summer holiday, was camp by a lake with a bunch of other spiritualists and
interesting.
Talk to all your friends and family in spirit. So in my family it was just a given, and my father went off as a 19-year-old with the British Expeditionary Force at the beginning of the war in Europe in 1939, and found himself fighting rearguard defence around the perimeter of Dunkirk while troops were evacuated from the beaches. And at that point he was spontaneously moved to put his hand on wounded comrades. They had no opportunity for medical supplies or medical evacuation, so he just put his hands on people, and to his amazement was able to stop bleeding and give pain relief, and indeed keep people alive. The main killer, I think, is battlefield shock from trauma and blood loss in those circumstances. So he was completely amazed that, sure enough, just like it says on the box, we've all got a gift of healing, and when circumstances arise to call it out, then it's there.
Yet he was still surprised.
I think it was amazing. He'd obviously grown up with those concepts.
Yes.
But perhaps in a more sort of abstract and sort of sitting room conversation fashion, rather than in the raw heat of the moment when nothing else would work, and only that could serve. So he then cultivated for the next 20 years through training and apprenticeships with different psychics and healers. I think most notably a gentleman called Harry Edwards, who was preeminent spiritual healer in the first half of the 1900s in the UK, and Dad was both a patient and a trainee of Harry's. And then as I think now, being of psychic ability in a military circumstance, that was found very helpful in a number of situations during campaigns. I know across North Africa they had nightly seances amongst the officers to help them establish enemy troop positions and numbers in the absence of satellite or other aerial reconnaissance. He was involved in studies where they doused the noon position of naval warships at sea to check on the accuracy of that.
There were studies of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently they were absolutely dead accurate. Could find a designated warship at sea wherever it was. And then quietly the use of dowsing to find and then subsequently disable landmines. And I know that those were things that he was personally involved in. I know the sort of extent of military uses of both dowsing and psychic practices are extensive, although often quite quietly done.
Yeah.
But use of remote viewing was big, I think, for a while.
And so he was in the army for
20 years. He was a military brat. His dad had been a career officer, and he'd been all the way through military college from, I think, aged 8 until 19.
Oh, wow.
So it was his life and his milieu.
But conversely then, not yours, because by then the centre was up and running and you had a different
I grew
context.
up with it, yes.
Yeah.
No, it was gurus for breakfast and llamas for lunch, because it was the first of its day, and so people came from Tibet and America and Scandinavia to visit and study, and they ran conferences and workshops and took apprentices. We had up to 8 full-time live-in apprentices for a while. Marvellous, as you can imagine.
Fascinating.
Kitchen table chats.
So these are your very young years then that you recall like this?
That was my growing up.
Yeah.
As far as I knew, that was normal.
Yeah. Well, when did you recognise that you were indeed carrying this ability as well?
I grew up fascinated by it and immersed in it, and frankly very much hoped that I could do it too.
As you would, I can well imagine.
And my plan was to join the family's business, and we certainly learned skills and worked on each other and animals and so on, just growing up. But honestly, until one's really in a situation of applied need, then that's when you get to see whether the thing really works nicely or not.
When did that come for you then?
So I was encouraged to take a degree in medicine before going into the holistic therapies field, partly for training, partly for subsequent issues of licensing and insurance and so on. So I went through medical school and got my basic medical license, and then at that point I took a year out to really focus on what part of the field was most interesting to me, and I was really fascinated by environmental health and working with places and the effects that those had on the people living there. And at the time, the World Health Organization had released statistics declaring that 30% of our buildings were sick buildings.
Yes.
based on a criteria of 20% or more of the occupants having health or comfort problems arising directly from the location. And there's 7 or 8 things on that list, including air quality, light quality, sound quality. But studies from Germany in the 1920s and 70s done by dowsers had shown very strong correlation with human health and something called geopathic stress. And geopathic stress arises when something natural to the site is stressful for health. The most classic of which is water running in underground streams or faults or fractures and fissures. And because water is the most electrically conductive material in the landscape, over a strong underground stream, the Earth's natural geomagnetic field expresses itself in a slightly more exaggerated and sometimes aggressive way, but also it acts as a pathway for atmospheric electromagnetism going to ground. So for hundreds, probably thousands of years, we'd known to avoid sleeping or building our houses or putting our animals close confined in locations where underground water was there. A study in 1928 by a Bavarian dowser called Baron Gustav Freer von Pohl. He dowsed for people for wells, but in the process of walking the landscape to see where the water runs, he observed several things. He observed that mammals and birds avoided sleeping over them or nesting over them entirely, and you'd have birds' nests in an overhanging eave, one in each rafter, and then a gap where there was no nest, and then it would pick up again, and the dowsing rods showed indeed that there was an underground stream just cutting under that location. So mammals avoided them, birds avoided them, but insects very attracted to them, and ants and bees and wasps would selectively and deliberately nest over them. So he observed this species preference and also observed the same in plants, that some plants were very adversely affected, especially fruit trees and vegetables that came to a head above ground, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, things of that nature, whereas some of our medicinal plants really thrived. So this was a curiosity, and he did a study in a town called Vilsbiburg, on a tributary of the Rhine. At the time had 3,500 people, and he'd previously dowsed municipal wells for them, and asked if he could do a health-related study. So with various German burghers, he went around the whole town and mapped out where all the water ran, and specifically if and when it ran under people's houses, and then especially if it ran under their beds. And then they compared that study with the available records of death by cancer, which went back to 1918. This was 28, so they had 10 years still of statistics, and they found that every single one of 52 people who had been documented as dying of a cancerous illness had been sleeping over one of these underground streams. So that was a real awakener for me as somebody interested in health, and particularly interested in being outdoors and the environmental aspects. I'd just say, in terms of that study, it was 1928 before we had all the carcinogens that we now have in our environment and diet. So it was possibly a study that would be hard to replicate now in terms of isolating causes. And we also don't know from the study how many people were sleeping over underground streams and didn't die from cancer. So it's not a complete medical study in that way, but a 100% association of, if you want to die by cancer, then you need to find yourself an environmental geopathic stress was certainly in my mind worth exploring, and sat very beautifully in the space of natural health dowsing and medicine. So it was a bit ideal for me. I want to go down. I don't know if we're going to be allowed to. Doesn't look familiar. No, they blocked us. There we go. So progressing that theme of human health in environmental context, and starting to work with people whose health was being affected adversely by their homes, I got to build up quite a lot of experience with what sort of patterns fitted what kind of illnesses and what the mix of influences were. So air, sound and light, but beyond that then the presence or absence of this physical geopathic stress was significant, but also I found of huge significance the presence or absence of residual energies of human thoughts and feelings, very colouring of the atmosphere with or without the presence of earthbound spirits, of ghosts in a place, with or without overshadowing of curses that might have been put onto a place with malevolent intention. And then as you get deeper into it, literally whether the spirit of place recognizes its current identity and use and the intentions of the people living there. Because if a place is fully appraised of what the people are up to, the natural inclination is, to the extent that it can, to support us, whether that's in growing the best field of carrots or having the most delightful restaurant experience or commercial, domestic, agricultural. Once the elemental consciousness is clear and without residual stresses and traumas, and then has clear communication as to what the people are up to, then you've really got a sort of working team, a marriage between people and place. Because our mind spans at least 4 octaves of consciousness, the so-called beta, alpha, theta, and delta bands, from 36 waves per second down to 0. And beta is our cognitive linear frequency set, and then below that alpha is where plants and animals basically are having their communications, and then below that theta is where the elemental realm has its cognitive consciousness. So we embrace all of those. Our Western mind has been trained into rational linear consciousness exclusively, and so we can miss out on all of the so particularly for an elemental, they're aware of the presence of a human mind, but they can't read our mind if we're in beta. So it's like being a diver underwater looking up at the shadow of a boat on the surface. Is it a fishing boat? Is it a warship? Is it kids out for a picnic? Don't know. We know that they're there, but unless they bridge into that elemental theta consciousness, they can't perceive our intention. And so what we look to do is identify, communicate with, and create cooperative agreements, basically, with those intelligences at place. And it's a slightly different conversation, whether it's a farm or a shopping mall or somebody's home, but it's effectively the same conversation. It's just a conversation of communication and agreement. And we start by healing any hurts that are present in the landscape, and then we get into communications, and then as required we can optimize with sound or homeopathy or biodynamics or radionics, etc. Stone circles, such as the one we're about to see, to really fine-tune like a musical instrument, so that the harmonics of the space are optimum for its currently dedicated use and purpose.
Perfect segue. Let's go to the stone circle.